So you have to have a very stubborn belief in what you're doing, but it is also a selling process. There's not many founders that have raised investment that would say they really enjoy the investment raising process. It's basically a necessary evil and a means to an end.
One of the most important things you're responsible for is to really keep the light on, right, in the house, and that fundraising process is really critical there.
You need to practice your pitch, you need to find out what they push back on, you need to get good at doing that pitch, and then it's effectively, in my opinion, a numbers game. What you mustn't fall into the trap of thinking is that raising investment makes you successful. Just because you raise money doesn't mean you have a good or even viable business.
Welcome everyone, welcome Steven to the show. Great to have you.
Thanks very much for inviting me on.
Pleasure is ours, really. So let's maybe start with who you are, what you do, and a little bit more about your company that you're building and the origin story. So if you could just provide some brief intro to yourself.
Sure. So Steven Renwick. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Tilores. And Tilores is a data infrastructure company. We are an API for unifying scattered customer data in real time. And what that means is if you're an enterprise, you've got customer data in lots of different databases, lots of different tools. One of the challenges is how do you create this unified picture of your customers? And we are the technology that does that. We do it using various fuzzy matching algorithms. We do it in real time, we do it at scale, and then we synchronize data back to your source data systems. It's a company we've been working on for about the last 2.5 years. The origin story is quite interesting because my co-founders and I were the tech team in a German consumer credit bureau. And as you can imagine, credit bureaus have exactly this problem. They have large volumes of data records coming in from lots of different sources. It's messy, it's inconsistent, and they need to unify this data together and say, this is all the data about one person. The technologies for doing that on the market are not very good. People will often try to use search engines or graph databases. They don't work for various reasons. So we built a new technology from scratch based on the AWS serverless stack. That replaced the infrastructure in the credit bureau. And then because we knew that lots of companies have exactly the same problem, we spun Tilores out into a new company to start selling the technology directly.
Amazing. That sounds really like quite a story. And how was that process? How is that's spinning out the process? Because that's not a common way to really start a company. I mean, of course, it happens. The companies spinning out of universities and some research institutions, but it doesn't generally spin out of German credit bureau, right? So how did it go?
Yeah, you're right. It's not usual, and of course, for the credit bureau, it wasn't a normal situation either. One of the things that's notable with this sort of technology is it's not the sort of thing you can start with an MVP. It has to be kind of enterprise level from day one, which is the advantage we had of spinning it out. The actual process of spinning it out, I cannot claim that was pain-free. We had to, of course, first of all, persuade the shareholders of the company because the IP belongs to them. In theory, you could all leave the business and start from scratch, but that would have taken a long time. So first of all, persuade the shareholders that the technology has more value outside the company than in the company. That took a wee while, but we generally agreed to it in principle. And then we just had to go through the process of registering a company, working out how the IP would be valued and how it would be spun out. And then we raised an investment round from some venture capital firms and some angels with the structure that the venture capital investors invested cash and the effective parent company invested the IP in lieu of cash, and then they got shares in the new business. And the important thing was that the parent company couldn't have too big of a chunk of shares. Obviously, they need to get a fair amount of shares in the business, but if they had said something like, "Oh, we want 50% of the business," then no investor would have touched it with a barge pole. So that's the important thing when doing a spin out, is to make sure that the amount that the parent company or originating company gets is realistic. And generally, if it's 10% or under, that's not going to bother any VC. And that's basically what we achieved. And you see sometimes, particularly from university spin-outs, that that's not the case. That universities, for example, they'll spin out some bit of IP and then they have these unrealistic expectations about how much equity they should retain, and they kind of ruin the company before it's even got started. We were lucky that that didn't happen to us.
That sounds really interesting. Actually, I just wanted to pick up a little bit more on the fact that you said that technology like that needs to be production grade or enterprise ready from day one. So I was wondering, did it help you that you actually came out of the German credit bureau? Did it help you to attract the first customers or build trust with enterprises?
Yeah, it definitely does, because most of the time we're dealing with unifying customer data. So that is the backbone of most companies. It's their most valuable data asset is company data. So they want to make sure that whoever they're giving this data to, they can really trust them. So yeah, having that that background with the credit bureau is very important. It gives us the credibility when we're speaking to new customers, because you really cannot get more about data privacy and data security than a regulated German credit bureau. So everyone knows that Germany takes data privacy and data compliance seriously. So yeah, it's very helpful for us.
Right, that's really fascinating. And we already touched on fundraising. So how's that process? Obviously lots of first-time founders, and you're I understand also a first-time founder struggle with that process. How did it go for you?
Well, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, but I'm not a first-time founder, so I have a previous company that I've raised funding for, so I've been through it a couple of times. It's a process that many people think is quite glamorous, because you're speaking to all these VCs, you're having lots of meetings, you're having lots of people being so interested in what you're doing. The reality is it's quite a painful process. You are having to do 100 conversations for one yes. You have to get very used to people saying they don't believe in what you're doing and they don't want to invest, and therefore you have to go into the next conversation with just as much passion, just as much enthusiasm, and really sell your business again, as if those first 99 people are just wrong. So you have to have a very stubborn belief in what you're doing. But it is also a selling process. So you have to be a good showman or salesperson, or both preferably. Once you've been raising investment for a while, you learn not to really like the process too much. There's not many founders that have raised investment that would say they really enjoy the investment raising process. It's basically a necessary evil and a means to an end. And what you mustn't fall into the trap of thinking is that raising investment makes you successful. That's the sort of thing that very often people believe from reading the tech media, because they're very often writing about people raising money. But just because you raise money doesn't mean you have a good or even viable business.
Right, of course, but as you said, it's a necessary means to really keep the company going, right? And you as a CEO of the company, eventually one of the most important things you're responsible for is to really keep the light on, right, in the house, and that fundraising process is really critical there. So obviously that makes sense. And so you mentioned you've spoken to more than 100 investors, right? Like how did you structure it? How did you approach it? Because I think as you said, like lots of founders are really overwhelmed by the amount of, or the sheer number of investors approaching them, and investors out there in Europe, in the US, elsewhere, and they often wise just can't really differentiate, who to talk to, who to go for, like how to really approach that process. Like what's your tip there?
You speak to 3 different people about how to raise investment, you'll get 3 different approaches. I would say that in an ideal world, you are very well prepared. You have your pitch deck ready. You have practiced it to the nth degree, so you are very good at pitching it. You're practicing it with contacts, your founders, whatever. You have your data room ready, and you already have been along the way nurturing relationships with VCs. So you have a good number of people that are ready to speak to you. A lot of people would say that your first 10 or so conversations should be with funds that you don't want, you don't really care about, your kind of your category
Right.
C choices maybe, because you need to practice your pitch, you need to find out what they push back on, you need to get good at doing that pitch. And then it's effectively, in my opinion, a numbers game. Now, if you're the hottest startup on the block at that point because you've built the best functioning vector database that's got 1,000 people a day signing up, maybe that's a different case. But most people are having to go through a bit of a numbers game. So ideally, try and get as many of those meetings done in a very short time period as possible, because once it starts to drag out, what you've got to realize is all these VCs are speaking to each other, especially the associates. They're very, the kind of younger ones in their 20s or 30s. They're sharing deals with each other. They're saying who they've spoken to. They're saying what's going on. And if word gets round that you are not doing well, that it's dragging out, then people start to realize and they start to question why. Another thing is that, ironically, even when you've got relationships with the VCs, it's sometimes still better to get someone else to make that introduction to you. And I've done this even with venture capital firms that I already know personally. I've actually got someone else to reintroduce me to them, because when someone else says, hey, I've seen this company, it looks really interesting, or even better, I am investing, or I'm already invested in this company, especially if they're planning to invest, that's what really triggers people, then you just get a much higher success rate. And the last thing I would say is it does get complicated. You do end up with loads and loads of moving parts, so you need to use a CRM system. It gets a bit tricky because if you've got like a kind of ingrained CRM system for your sales, you want to try and keep that separate from your venture CRM system. And so you maybe want to use a different kind of CRM system. I ended up literally using Chrome for normal business and then Safari for investor business, because I had different plugins connected to it for the CRM system. So treat it like a sales pipeline and just move people down, nudge people when you've not heard back from them. Don't let any deals go cold, and just keep nurturing. And you're trying to get everything done, if you're lucky, within 3 months.
Right. Now, this is really consistent with also how I've seen it. So, a lot of people always keep saying prepare. That's very important, and I agree. Like, I think preparation is key. Then use the momentum, right? So get as many investors, talk to as many investors as possible. At the same time. So, like, in a given time frame, like everyone knows you're fundraising, right? And as you said, like also this back channel or this reintroductions or the source of intro really matters. But I think eventually you need to convince your investors to invest in you, right? And what was it in your case? What do you believe your investors needed to believe in to invest in your business? Like, what do you think that was?
That's a good question, because what they need to believe in depends on, I guess, the stage of the company that you have. So
Yeah.
I mean, we've effectively raised pre-seed money. So what our investors, I think, needed to believe is that we are a capable, competent team, that we're complementary with each other. I think we tick that box because we've been working in this field together for years. Like, we were working together in the credit bureau already for years. We're kind of experts in that field of data, so they believe that the technology is actually good. That was an advantage we had because the technology is in operation in an enterprise environment. So that kind of ticks that box. And the bit which is you've got to take the leap of faith in is there a market for this technology? Is this a solution looking for a problem, or is there a real big obvious problem out there? And I think the whole kind of data, big data trend, which is maybe a little bit passe, but it's kind of moved on to the AI trend. In the end, it's all about having quality data. It doesn't matter how good your AI models are, it doesn't matter how good your machine learning is, if it's not based on well-structured, good data, it's not going to work well. And we know that all companies want to do this kind of data unification. That's our kind of entire thesis is companies want to unify their data, but there's a tiny percentage of companies that actually unify their data, and of those companies that do unify their data, even a smaller percentage of companies actually manage to make it usable. And that is something that's quite universal. You'll find that if you speak to any kind of people working in enterprise data. And that was what our investors needed to believe, and in some cases just hear from themselves directly from customers.
Right. And so in such case, I'm hearing that AI essentially was a little bit of a tailwind for you rather than a headwind, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tailwind, but to be honest, we haven't emphasized the AI side of what we do very much. I mean, until recently, we didn't have much AI in the product. And to be honest with you, many investors were actually find that quite refreshing that we were not saying we're another AI company. We have, since recently, added some LLM elements, some machine learning elements into kind of the way the matching works, the way we organize the data. But other than that, we're not usually positioning ourselves as an AI company. Maybe we are actually an infrastructure, we are a data infrastructure company, which can enable AI use cases which are otherwise maybe not possible. So we do have that bit of the tailwind behind us.
Makes sense. That obviously help. And having said that, so you originally went to market, obviously, spinning out of the German credit bureau, and obviously that gave you a little bit of a sort of also tailwind, right, to sort of get to the market first. But I guess then you actually have to like start growing much faster and like really catering for that sort of VC type of returns, right? Or like aiming for that sort of bigger return on the investment. So how was the transition, and also how did you actually address the market, or how are you addressing the market currently, because we're still an early stage company?
Yeah, so the two challenges we faced were, first of all, the product was initially an API only, so completely headless, and it worked very well, but it was very difficult to show anyone. It's pretty difficult to sell a non-open source technology via an API console. So the first year we spent was kind of building Tilores into a cloud SaaS product. We've always run on AWS. The difference was making it something where you had a user interface. You could sign up and you could run it just by connecting into the API. And then we built in things like a visual rule builder and a way of analyzing the unified entities inside Tilores. And that took a bit of work. And then it made a massive difference once we started selling Tilores, because suddenly people were like, oh, that looks really cool. So that was one of the first challenges. The other challenge, which is arguably bigger, is, and I wouldn't claim we've solved it yet, is positioning. And positioning comes before product market fit. It is, what are we for who? We know that we're a very good technology for doing this data matching. It's what you would call in data science entity resolution, but 99% of people don't know what entity resolution is. And I would say 90% of software engineers don't know what entity resolution is. So although we're addressing a very, very common data problem, it's very difficult to actually say to people what we are in one sentence. So we spent that first. So we launched the kind of the SaaS product at the end of 22. And then we spent a long time telling people that it's an entity resolution system. But that is difficult to sell to people who don't have a clue what you're talking about. So we've been working on positioning recently. That's why if you stop in the street and ask me what I'll do, I'll say it's an API for unifying scattered customer data in real time. It just works a lot easier with people. So we're still testing that. We're still seeing how much difference it makes to our sales process. So that's still to be kind of tested and proven. So we're definitely pre-product market fit. What we're aiming now for is message market fit. And the other thing is, which goes hand in hand with this, is what's our target market? It's a very horizontal technology. It's data infrastructure. We could be used for product matching for a marketplace. We could be used for customer matching for fraud prevention. It means that many different companies could use us. So who do we actually try to target? Who do we write our content for? So trying to pick one use case and one kind of ideal customer profile or ICP has been very important.
Right. That obviously, like this focus in early stage companies, and finding that indeed this even in message product fit, as you said, or message market fit is key. And I was wondering, so you mentioned AWS and SaaS. So are you running your SaaS solution on AWS, and are you like on AWS Marketplace? Is this your distribution channel, or how are you actually distributing the product?
So we offer 3 versions of Tilores. One is what we would call our cloud version. So you sign up with our user interface, you run it via the user interface, and you just connect via connectors or the API, but we manage the actual instance. And that's our preferred version. It's significantly easier for anyone to use. If for whatever reason you don't want to do that, or you don't want the data to leave your environment, we can run in your AWS account. Takes a lot more effort to install it, but it's still relatively simple via our CLI tool. You just don't get a user interface, which makes it a bit more difficult to set up. You can use the public SaaS for setup and then import the configuration file into the private SaaS. Fine. And we also do have an on-premise version, which is for extremely large use cases that would run on AWS but would be too expensive. We are in the AWS marketplace. We're an AWS partner. AWS is a very good and active partner. They're very helpful. They're very engaged. They've got very good kind of vertical sales teams, but we don't sell via the marketplace very often. It's more like a badge of credibility for us. It's kind of useful for procurement because we can sell via our AWS. If you're already an AWS customer, we can be effectively another AWS product. But it's not like we get people saying that they found us via the AWS marketplace. No.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is really the same experience we were having at Simplyblock, because in reality, our product is deployed very similarly to yours, or like the deployment options are quite similar. And we've seen that AWS Marketplace is really not a discovery tool; it's more of a procurement tool, but that really gives you ability to sell to large enterprises from day one, because you're essentially AWS just consolidates the bill and sends to a large enterprise, right? And all the agreements are standard, so you don't have to worry about that, right? But what I understand from you, it doesn't really happen so easily, right?
No, I mean, even if you do the procurement via AWS, it makes things a little bit more tricky for you because you're not getting paid directly by the customer. There's a longer, there's obviously a time lag before the money hits your account, and AWS takes a small commission fee as well. So yeah, it's overall it could be simple for the customer, and if it's simple for the customer, then we'll just do it. But we still prefer to contract directly.
Right, makes sense. And how do you? So what is your main source of leads at the moment? Of course, we don't want you to reveal like the secret sauce here, but like for the first time founders, obviously, or generally for founders and other startups, it's always interesting to hear like, how do you actually sell? How do you get people to look at your product, come to your website, read your blog posts? So like, what are you doing there? Are you doing SEO, content marketing, outbound? Are you going for conferences? All of that.
A lot of the initial customers came via network because I've just been in tech for quite a while. I've got a reasonably good network. Eventually, you kind of exhaust that. Our main source of leads is inbound, and it's SEO mainly. So we have several pages on our website which rank very highly for kind of data science terms related to data matching. So very often people are searching for things that are related to data matching, and they'll find our website and talk to us. And it can be pretty big companies. So it's like Fortune 500 companies that are contacting us because they found one of our web pages. As a kind of data infrastructure or cloud infrastructure technology, we also speak a lot with system integrator agencies. So it's probably the same sorts of people that you speak with, because large enterprises, if they're doing a big data transformation project, they're very unlikely to be doing that themselves. They will have an agency in-house coming into them to do that. So those agencies need to have a kind of a toolbox that they will use based on whatever use case they're working on. So that has been pretty important for us. Outbound, we've not cracked yet. We experiment with it sometimes, but again, because we were not very sure on our ICP and our messaging, that had a relatively low success rate. So we're going to try and start that again. I don't think anybody can avoid outbound. Even when you're a super technical product, you still have to, I think, have some control over your own leads. So we'll see how that works. LinkedIn does bring us a lot. I've not been very active recently. I've just been too busy on other things. But if you're posting the right sort of content and engaging a lot, yeah, that brings you, that will get you on the radar of people. And it's funny, sometimes you'll just see something as silly as somebody significant who's well connected, then commenting on one of your posts brings it into the timeline of other people who are relevant, and suddenly you've got 4 or 5 leads just because someone's commented on your what you've posted. And the last thing we do quite often is kind of showcases. So we'll find an interesting data set, we'll put it in Tilores, deduplicate it, and see what the results are. So we've done that twice. We did the UK's registry of company directors, which is riddled with duplicates. And we downloaded data on 50 million voters in the US and looked for people that had more than one registered voting profile. And we did that at the end of last year. You can imagine that's quite a kind of controversial topic, but it gets quite a lot of attention on Tilores as a tool that can do this at scale.
Right. Wow. That's super interesting. And what was the result of the latter?
So the analysis for the voter data, we found, I can't remember, it was like between, maybe it's like 1.5% of people had more than one voting profile. If they registered at one address, then moved and registered another address, or they'd moved from county to county or state to state, they would have more than one profile. And there is a process in place to clean that data. So, it's maybe not quite that bad. And it's not illegal to have more than one voting profile. It's only illegal to vote more than once. And so we looked at that as well. And we did find a small number of cases where people had attempted to vote more than once. As far as I'm aware, most of those cases were actually caught by the authorities. So we did not find any evidence of large-scale voting fraud, which is reassuring.
Right, so you didn't put anyone in jail
yet. Not us.
All right, and so maybe zooming out, because we're slowly running out of time. So again, coming back to AI, obviously hot topic, right? Like, how do you see AI and machine learning like impacting the future of cloud infrastructure as a whole, but maybe more directly your piece of cloud infrastructure?
Well, I guess the whole Gen AI race is driving adoption of cloud infrastructure because it's very difficult to use these technologies without being in the cloud.
Right.
I mean, where we've deployed it recently is we've added machine learning based matching, which just makes the whole matching process faster. What we've also had recently, which is pretty interesting or exciting for us, is people wanting to use Tilores as a data source for large language models. So that would be so-called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, which actually we've tested and works quite well. We're building an integration for LangChain just now to see if we can release that and get more people using Tilores for large language models. So people, as I said at the start, people using AI models need to have good data, and Tilores is about making data better, regardless of the use case. In this case, making it better for large language models makes a lot of sense.
Right. That's clear. And I try to always ask the same closing questions. And the first is really like, what are the most valuable resources that help you shape your view of what you're doing, or of the cloud infrastructure space that you're in? Like, what were the resources, like books, podcasts, tweets, blogs, videos, whatever, that sort of re-emphasized your conviction into the space?
In that case, I would say honestly, my resource was my co-founders. I mean, specifically when it comes to like the cloud, the origins of the origin story is that in the credit bureau, we were using kind of traditional servers. Like we had servers in-house, we had racks in some server center somewhere. And it was when my co-founder Hendrik came into the credit bureau that he persuaded them to move onto the cloud. We went on with serverless. We became relatively cutting edge for AWS serverless technologies. And it was that kind of transformation. It made it's massively simplified life in the credit bureau, made everything a lot more efficient. That was my main kind of eye-opening for the power of the cloud. So, I'm not an engineer myself, so I can't claim to be an expert in it, but my co-founders are. So they're my main resource. Other than that, AWS itself is an incredibly good resource. They've got, unlimited amounts of content about cloud. So that's the sort of stuff I'll usually consume.
Yeah, but that's a great one. Like I think in my case, it's probably also my co-founder. So actually, I would second your story. Of course, there's like tons of resources here and there, but actually, it's a really good one. And it emphasizes that you really trust each other, right? And the other question, the last question would be, again, we talked about AI, and you might also still answer AI, but like generally, what do you think is the most exciting thing that you see happening in cloud infrastructure space, overall, maybe even beyond what Tilores does, or what you're really focused on? Like what really excites you, that you've seen out there?
Good question. Maybe this is a little bit of a Tilores focused answer, but we feel that we're quite on the leading edge of serverless. And I think serverless is underappreciated by businesses because we still have conversations with businesses where a CTO will be saying, yeah, but how many servers do you have? Or how do your servers work? And we have to explain to them, we literally don't have servers. That is what serverless means. Obviously, it's running on AWS's servers, but the way that the complexity of managing infrastructure is abstracted away by serverless is, I think, very impressive. And more companies could benefit from that simplicity. It comes with a cost, but I think the more people that are using it, then the costs are obviously only going down. I think even for AWS, serverless is quite at the advanced edge. There are certain things which, for example, we're in the marketplace as a serverless product, but we cannot offer our serverless product as a kind of a product to be deployed in someone's account as a serverless product. You'd have to be a kind of a more like a standard AWS product. And that feels like AWS hasn't quite caught up with the idea that there could be purely serverless products out there. So yeah, serverless for me is what's kind of interesting and exciting in the cloud-based world. From our point of view, we're very interested to see how that develops for large language models. We don't want to be just jumping on something because it's got a lot of hype. We want people to actually use it because it's useful, has utility. So we'll see. We'll kind of hopefully test that with the market and see whether or not there's any real substance to this for us.
Perfect. That was great. Thank you very much, Steven. Anything you'd like the audience to know? Anything you'd like to share about your company, about the next steps, or where to find you online? Feel free to do that now.
Yeah, well, the website is tilores.io, so tilores.io. From there, you can find our socials and keep an eye out for that large language model use case that's coming out. We've also got vastly improved onboarding coming soon, so kind of machine learning based onboarding to make it very easy to get started. So yeah, check out the product and let me know what your feedback is.
Perfect. That's exciting, and I hope that many of the audience will actually check it out and check some of the case studies that you've also shared and spoke about. Thank you again, and it was really a pleasure having you, and until the next one.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's been fun.